The sky outside the cottage had turned the color of charcoal, and the wind howled like a lonely dog as the first droplets of rain pattered against the thin windows. Claire Holden glanced up from the worn floorboards of the hallway to the corner of the ceiling in her son's room, where a brownish stain had spread into an ominous puddle-shaped mark. It had grown over the past week, turning from a barely there smudge to something she could no longer ignore. She stood there with her arms crossed, fingers pressing into her own ribcage as if trying to hold herself together. The cottage was old, maybe too old for a single mother raising a growing boy, but it was what she could afford. Barely. Another sharp plink echoed through the room as a fat drop of water escaped the ceiling and landed squarely on the hardwood floor. Claire sighed and disappeared into the kitchen, grabbing the biggest soup pot she could find. When she returned, she placed it under the drip and watched as another droplet landed with a metallic ping. Josh was perched cross-legged on his twin bed, completely immersed in a tattered comic book, seemingly unbothered by the miniature storm forming inside his room. He had a blanket draped around his small shoulders like a cape, and his brow furrowed in mock seriousness as he flipped the pages. Claire gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Hey, buddy, we're gonna make camp in the living room tonight, okay?" Josh looked up. "Because of the leak?" She nodded. "Yep. Just until I can patch it up. It's not safe to sleep in here with water coming down." He didn't pout, didn't ask questions, just gave her a small, understanding nod. Josh had learned early that when his mom said something needed to be done, it usually meant money was tight and choices had to be made. Claire sometimes wondered if she'd stolen too much of his childhood by simply surviving. "I'll bring the flashlight," he said, already hopping off the bed and collecting his favorite dinosaur, Rexy, and a pillow. They set up their makeshift tent in the living room. Blankets hung between chairs, a mattress dragged off the pull-out couch, and a small lantern flickering in the middle like a campfire. Josh was asleep within 30 minutes, the soft rise and fall of his chest barely audible over the distant rumble of thunder. But Claire couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch in the dark, her hands buried in her hair. Her mind was a loud storm of its own. There was a time, not so long ago, when she and her husband Daniel had bought this place with excitement in their voices and plans for a vegetable garden in the backyard. That was before the arguments, the job loss, the growing emotional distance. He had walked out when Josh was 6, said he needed to find himself. He found himself in California with a new girlfriend and a high-paying tech job. Claire found herself alone in a cold house with peeling paint and mounting bills. She had picked up 2 part-time jobs, cleaning houses during the day and mopping floors at a gas station at night. Every dime went to rent, utilities, and Josh's needs. There was nothing left for leaks or luxuries. Still, she fought. Every day. That night, with the rain battering the roof, she crept up into the attic with a flashlight and a roll of duct tape. She had found an old tarp, probably left behind by the previous tenants, and she crawled carefully across the beams, her knees digging into the wooden slats. The crack was obvious, a jagged split in one of the roof tiles directly above Josh's room. Rainwater spilled in through the opening, soaking the insulation and pooling in little dark puddles. She worked quietly and quickly, teeth chattering in the cold as she secured the tarp with tape, some nails, and a prayer. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't last. But it might buy her a few days. Back downstairs, soaked and shivering, she peeled off her wet hoodie and stared out the window. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the twisted branches of the oak tree that leaned toward the house, like it too, carried burdens. She made herself a cup of tea with the last of the tea bags. Cheap store-brand chamomile. She sat down at the table and looked at the list she kept pinned on the fridge. Rent, $850, due next week. Gas bill, $92. Josh's sneakers, size 3, soles peeling. Grocery budget, $45 left for the week. It read like a countdown. And then she noticed the envelope, The one marked Notice of Repairs Needed, Tenant Responsible, taped to the inside of the front door. The landlord, always careful to cover himself, had reminded her 3 times that roof maintenance wasn't his problem unless she agreed to a rent increase. She hadn't. She couldn't. Her jaw clenched. She tore the envelope in half. The storm outside continued to rage, but it was nothing compared to the one inside her. One made of fear, exhaustion, and the relentless determination not to give up. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last night her world looked this way. The storm, in its own chaotic mercy, was about to change everything. The morning came slowly, dragging in gray clouds and a brittle chill. Claire stirred from a restless sleep on the couch, her neck stiff and back sore. The storm had slowed, but not passed, and outside, the skies still looked ready to burst. She gently moved her arm from around Josh, who had shifted closer to her sometime during the night. His small hand still gripped her sleeve. Claire's heart tugged. She kissed his forehead and rose, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The leak in the ceiling had slowed to a lazy drip. The tarp must have held, at least temporarily. She tiptoed toward the kitchen, already calculating her day. Make breakfast, call Mrs. Donnelly to reschedule the cleaning job, work her shift at the gas station tonight, and maybe, just maybe, figure out how to get a roofing estimate without breaking into tears when they quoted the price. The power flickered as she poured cereal into Josh's bowl. She held her breath. Flicker. Buzz. Back on. She exhaled. Just one more thing going wrong might tip her over. Josh appeared, rubbing his eyes and dragging Rexy behind him. Did the ceiling fall down? Claire chuckled lightly. Not yet. Supermom saved the day. You should wear a cape, he said, sliding into his seat. Like the ones in the comics. She smiled, tousled his hair, and sat beside him. Maybe I will. They ate in silence, the kind shared by people who don't need to fill it with words. Claire cherished that part of Josh. He was like her, quiet, observant, kind. After breakfast, she peeked at her phone. One missed call from the landlord, ignored. One text from her boss at the gas station. Need you to come in an hour early. Backup called out again. Claire swallowed. That meant less time to sort the roof, less time to rest. But it also meant extra money. $10 more she couldn't afford to turn down. She sent a quick reply. On my way. Then she texted Patty next door, who immediately agreed to watch Josh. The old woman had a soft spot for him, and a strange tolerance for reruns of Dino Quest, which Claire knew he'd already seen 100 times. By noon, Claire was at the station, tying on her apron and tucking her frizzed curls beneath her cap. The place was unusually quiet for a stormy day. People were staying home. Only the brave or the broke ventured out. She cleaned the coffee counter, restocked snacks, and mopped the front entrance for the 3rd time before the door chime jingled. A man in a long black coat stepped inside, shaking the rain from his shoulders. He wore a ball cap pulled low and boots caked in dried mud. He looked out of place, too well dressed to be local, too tense to be passing through. Claire straightened. Afternoon. The man nodded curtly and made his way to the coolers, grabbing a bottle of water and a protein bar. He brought them to the counter and fished into his wallet. You folks get hit hard by the storm? He asked casually, eyes flicking up to meet hers. Claire hesitated. Little roof trouble, nothing we can't handle. Always the roofs, he said, handing her a $20 bill. My sister had the same thing in Nashville. Cost her a fortune. Claire gave him a polite smile as she handed back his change. That's usually how it goes. He lingered a moment, then tapped the counter. Well, good luck with that. Hope you stay dry. And then he was gone. She watched him walk to a sleek black SUV. Definitely not from around here. For a moment, she wondered why he'd stopped at this dusty station at all. Something about his manner made her uneasy, but the thought drifted away as the next customer walked in. By the time Claire made it home, the storm had picked up again. The wind screamed around the corners of the house, slamming branches against the side like angry fists. Rain fell sideways, blowing in under the porch roof. Patty met her at the door. "You better come in through the back," she warned. "Tree down on the front road. Looks like it hit the neighbor's fence." Claire hurried inside, finding Josh curled on the couch with a blanket and a book. He leaped up when he saw her. "Mom! The tree fell. It was so loud." "I saw it." She knelt and gave him a squeeze. "You okay?" He nodded. "Patty made grilled cheese." Claire looked at the woman with gratitude. "You're a lifesaver." Patty shrugged. "We've all been there." Thunder boomed in the distance again. Claire stood and looked toward Josh's room. The ceiling would only get worse now. She would have to get someone, anyone, to help. But how? She didn't even have enough left in her account for a consultation fee. That night, after Josh was in bed, she scrolled job boards and repair forums, trying to find a miracle. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, and her fingers hovered over an ad that read, "Storm Recovery Grants. Immediate help for local homeowners. No strings, just stories." She clicked. It led to a page run by a nonprofit media foundation. They were funding emergency repairs for struggling single parents, especially those hit hardest by recent storms. Applicants needed to share their story and prove their situation. Claire hesitated. She wasn't one to air her life to strangers. But the ceiling was caving in. She began typing. "My name is Claire Holden. I live in a 70-year-old cottage with my 8-year-old son, Josh. The roof over his bedroom started leaking last week, and now with this storm, it's worse than ever. I've done what I can with a tarp and duct tape, but it's temporary. I work 2 jobs. I'm trying. I always try. But this time, I might be in over my head." She attached photos, the spreading brown stain, the soup pot collecting drips, and a blurry picture of Josh reading by flashlight. She paused, added one more line. "Please, I just want to keep my son dry and safe," and hit submit. Then she turned off the screen and cried silently in the dark. The next morning came with silence, an eerie kind of quiet after days of wind and rain. Claire awoke with a jolt, her heart racing. It wasn't the storm that had roused her. It was the absence of it. She threw back the blanket and hurried to the window. The skies were still gray, but the clouds had lifted. Trees leaned with broken branches, and puddles dotted the streets. But the worst seemed over. Claire rushed to Josh's room. He was still asleep, hugging Rexy, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm. She looked up at the ceiling. The tarp had held. Barely. A corner had sagged, forming a water bubble that pulsed like a blister. But the ceiling hadn't collapsed. She exhaled deeply. Then came a knock at the door. Claire tensed. No one visited unannounced. Not here. She stepped cautiously to the front and peeked through the peephole. A man in a tan jacket, clipboard in hand, stood on the porch. Behind him, a white pickup with a company logo parked half on the curb. Claire opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" "Claire Holden?" the man asked, friendly but direct. "Yes." He grinned. "I'm Alan Park from Hands of Hope Foundation. You submitted an application last night." Claire blinked. "Wait, that was real?" "Very real, and I just happened to be in town. We were already working 2 blocks over. Storm damage like yours is our specialty. Mind if I take a look?" She stood frozen for a moment, processing. Was this a scam? Was he going to ask for money up front? "You don't need to pay me anything," he said gently, as if reading her mind. "All expenses are covered. You told your story. Now let us do our part." Claire stepped aside, stunned. "Sure, come in." He walked through the tiny living room and down the hallway, peering into Josh's room. Yep. Classic water penetration from old shingles and sagging rafters. This roof's overdue." "I know," she said softly. "I've patched it so many times, I've lost count." Alan smiled. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." He walked back toward the door. "If you're comfortable, I can have a small team here in the next hour. We'll get the tarp off, assess the deck, and replace what needs replacing. Won't even take a full day. Claire stared at him. But why? Because you asked, he said simply. And because you're not the only one trying to hold a world together with duct tape and courage. Let us be the nails for once. She didn't realize she was crying until Alan handed her a tissue. Take a breath, he said. We've got you. By noon, 2 more trucks had arrived. Men in work boots climbed onto the roof while others brought in equipment. Claire made sandwiches for the team, feeling dazed, like she was dreaming. She sat beside Josh, watching through the window as shingles flew off, old boards were hauled away, and fresh materials were laid down with precision. Mom, are they fixing it for real? Josh asked, his eyes wide. Yes, baby, she whispered. They really are. He leaned into her side. I thought only superheroes helped people for free. Claire kissed the top of his head. Turns out some do wear tool belts. Alan returned after lunch with paperwork for Claire to sign. No hidden fees, no strings. The organization's donors covered all the costs in exchange for allowing the story to be shared anonymously online. Claire hesitated, then nodded. If it helps someone else like me, she said, it's worth it. By evening, the roof was sealed, the ceiling was reinforced, and a fresh coat of white paint had replaced the brown water stains. Alan stood at the door, wiping his hands on a rag. We'll come by tomorrow to double-check everything, but tonight, sleep easy. Claire looked around her home. Humble, yes, but no longer broken, and her eyes brimmed with tears again. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because, for the first time in so long, she felt supported. Thank you, she whispered. He tipped his cap. Thank you for not giving up. That night, Josh insisted on sleeping in his room. Claire hesitated, but the boy was adamant. Mom, the storm's over. The monsters are gone. He climbed into bed, Rexy tucked under one arm, and pointed at the ceiling. No more drips. Claire kissed his cheek. No more drips. She stood in the doorway long after he closed his eyes, watching him breathe steadily in the dim light. For the first time in what felt like forever, his room was just that. A room, not a battleground. Later, she curled up on the couch with a cup of tea and opened her email. There, in bold letters, was a reply from someone named Lena Roberts, editor for the Hands of Hope Foundation blog. Claire, we read your story aloud at our morning meeting. It reminded us why we do what we do. Would you consider writing more? Maybe a monthly post for our Single Parent Voices series? Paid, of course. You have a gift, let us know. Warmly, Lena Claire blinked. A paid writing gig? She reread the message twice, her heart thudding. Her thoughts drifted to the years she spent scribbling in journals and writing bedtime stories for Josh. She had forgotten she even liked writing. And now, here was a door she hadn't knocked on. Opened anyway. She clicked reply and began to type. The next morning, Claire stepped onto the porch with her coffee. The air was crisp and clean. Sunlight danced on the wet leaves, and the smell of pine and damp earth filled the air. She watched Josh run out in his rain boots, stomping puddles and chasing a bird off the lawn. Laughter bubbled from him freely. For once, it wasn't drowned by worry. Patty waved from next door. Looks like the roof held. Claire smiled. Better than duct tape. As she turned to go back inside, her phone buzzed. Another email. From the local school board. Subject. Congratulations. Your application has been approved. Claire stared at it in disbelief. She'd almost forgotten she applied for the district scholarship last month, a special grant for single parents studying to rejoin the workforce. And now, she was in. She laughed, full and bright. The storm hadn't broken her. It had cleared the way. Claire adjusted the straps of her old backpack, glancing nervously at her reflection in the dark screen of her laptop. It had been years since she last studied anything more complex than tax forms or grocery budgets. Now, here she was, starting a certified online course in early childhood education with help from the district grant. Josh peeked over her shoulder, eyes wide. Are you going back to school too, Mommy? She smiled. Looks like it, huh? Are you gonna get homework like me? Lots of it, Claire chuckled. But I'll be okay. In truth, she wasn't sure. Her days were already filled to the brim with cleaning shifts, meal prepping, and the never-ending list of mom duties. But something inside her had stirred ever since the storm. The way Alan and his team had shown up, the writing opportunity, and now this scholarship. Maybe the world hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer saw herself as a woman barely surviving. She was evolving, climbing, even if the ladder was rickety and tall. She made a study nook at the kitchen table, stacked with sticky notes and printouts. At night, after putting Josh to bed, she'd stay up until her eyes burned, watching modules, taking quizzes, writing essays. The first time she submitted an assignment, she hovered over the Submit button for nearly 10 minutes. Here goes everything, she whispered. Click. When her professor emailed back with a great job, Claire, and a 94% grade, she cried again. But this time, they were proud tears. Meanwhile, her blog posts for Hands of Hope began gaining traction. Her first piece, titled The Leak That Broke Me, got thousands of views. People wrote back. Other single moms, dads, people in recovery, veterans, widows, even retirees, all echoing one thing. I thought I was alone. Claire made a habit of reading their comments each morning with her coffee. It became a ritual of connection, a digital heartbeat reminding her that her words mattered. Sometimes Josh would catch her smiling at the screen and ask, Did someone like your homework again? She'd nod. A lot of people did. Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed in pinks and whites, and the sound of hammers faded from the neighborhood as the last of the storm-damaged homes were repaired. Josh's birthday arrived in March. Claire had planned a modest backyard party, just cupcakes, balloons, and 3 of his closest classmates. But when she opened the door, she found more than expected. Alan stood on the porch with 2 other crew members from Hands of Hope. One of them held a wrapped gift, something long and narrow. Happy birthday, champ, Alan said. Josh gasped. For me? The gift was a brand new soccer net. Claire was stunned. I didn't know, she started. Alan waved her off. You told me he loved to play but had no space. Figured we'd build one of our collapsible goals. They set it up in the yard in 20 minutes, just in time for Josh's friends to arrive. That day, the backyard roared with laughter and cheers. For hours, it wasn't the same struggling household at the end of the street. It was the house, the one where the fun lived. Claire stood back, arms folded, watching her son dart across the grass. His cheeks flushed with joy, his smile uncontainable. And her heart, so used to bracing for impact, finally settled into something else. Peace. The weeks blurred into a rhythm. Morning routines, school drop-offs, cleaning shifts, coursework, blog writing. But Claire no longer felt like she was surviving under pressure. She was blooming under it. Each completed assignment built her confidence. Each reader comment reaffirmed her voice. The blog's readership doubled by the 3rd post. The foundation even offered to increase her pay per article. You have something, Lena had written. Your words make people feel less broken. That stuck with her. Claire hadn't just patched her home. She'd started patching herself. She even began setting small savings aside from the blog income. $20 here, $50 there. For the first time in years, her account balance was rising instead of bouncing. One evening, she dared to dream bigger and scribbled the words House Deposit Fund on a mason jar. Josh decorated it with dinosaur stickers. We'll call it the Dino Fund, he declared. Claire laughed. Perfect. But life, as it does, tested her again. One Thursday afternoon, the cleaning company she worked for announced layoffs. Budget cuts. Claire was among the last 3 let go. It felt like a slap. She sat in her car in the empty lot, gripping the steering wheel. Tears welled up. But then, her phone buzzed. A message from Lena. "Hi Claire, the blog is exploding. Would you be open to weekly video segments? We'd send equipment, you'd record from home, maybe even expand into a podcast. We're pitching you for a feature on the morning beat. Think about it. You're ready." Claire stared at the screen, blinking. Laid off one moment, leveled up the next. She laughed, watery and wild. "All right, universe," she whispered. "I see you." She drove home and hugged Josh so tightly he squealed. "Did something happen, Mommy?" "Yeah," she said, wiping her face. "Something good." That weekend, she set up a tiny recording nook in the hallway closet, lined with pillows for soundproofing, hung a thrifted curtain as a backdrop, and used her phone clipped to a makeshift tripod made from books. The first video was shaky, her hands trembled, but she spoke straight into the lens. "Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a single mom. I almost gave up when the ceiling collapsed, but then help came, right in the middle of a storm. I'm still learning, still climbing, and if you're out there doing the same, this space is for you." The video went viral. Comments poured in. Moms from Kentucky to Kenya thanked her. A man who lost his wife said her words gave him hope. A teacher wrote in saying she played the video for her class about resilience. Claire's email flooded with offers, guest speaker panels, sponsorships. A publisher even asked if she'd ever considered writing a memoir. The girl who once duct-taped her roof now had a platform. Claire and Josh marked the one-year anniversary of the storm by baking a cake. They ate it, sitting on their now-repaired roof under the sunset sky. Just the two of them, surrounded by birdsong and soft breezes. "Remember when this was broken?" Josh asked, licking frosting off his fingers. Claire nodded. "It was leaking and loud. But now it's strong." "Yes," she said, looking into the distance. "So are we." 6 months after the storm, Claire stood at the front of a crowded community center gymnasium, heart pounding, as she adjusted the microphone clipped to her shirt. Rows of folding chairs were filled with families, teachers, church members, and local leaders. The banner behind her read, "Rebuild and Rise, Stories of Resilience." Lena had invited her to be the keynote speaker. Claire had tried to decline, twice. But Lena insisted. "You're not just surviving anymore," she said. "You're inspiring. Own it." So here she was, nerves jangling, the lights warm on her face. She glanced down at the index cards in her hand, but didn't need them. She looked out into the sea of faces, then to the front row, where Josh sat swinging his legs and grinning at her. Claire took a breath. "My name is Claire," she began, voice steady. "And not too long ago, I thought a storm had ruined my life. Water poured through my ceiling, the walls cracked, and I remember thinking, this is it, we're done." Murmurs rippled softly through the crowd. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something I didn't expect. Not just a new roof, but a new path, new courage, a reminder that help exists, even when you're too tired to ask for it. She smiled at the thought of Alan, of the volunteers, of Josh's glow when he saw his room finished. "I found my voice in the middle of wreckage. I started telling my story, and people listened. And through that, I realized something powerful. When you speak up, others rise with you." A gentle round of applause swelled, encouraging her. So today, I don't just speak as a mom who weathered a storm, but as a woman who learned she's capable of more than just making ends meet. I'm building a life, not just patching holes. And you can too. When she stepped down from the podium, the applause was thunderous. Later that evening, Claire and Josh walked hand in hand to the nearby playground. The sky was clear. Its oranges and purples splashed across the horizon like watercolors. Josh climbed the jungle gym while Claire sat on a bench, scrolling through her emails. One caught her eye. It was from the publisher again. Subject, book proposal approval. Claire, we're thrilled to offer you a contract for your memoir. Working title, What the Storm Left Behind. We think it's going to change lives. Call me when you can. Claire gasped softly. Mommy, Josh called from the top of the slide. Yes, baby? Look! He stretched his arms out wide, wind blowing through his hair. I'm flying! Claire smiled up at him. You sure are? In the months that followed, everything changed. But also, nothing did. She still packed lunches, still folded socks mismatched from the dryer. She still had nights when doubt whispered cruel things. But now, Claire knew how to answer it. She taught online parenting webinars. She partnered with Hands of Hope to write their first book of family stories. Her podcast, The Broken Ceiling, was downloaded in over 40 countries. Her mason jar savings? It grew into a down payment. A year to the day after the storm, Claire and Josh moved into a small but bright two-bedroom home across town. It had hardwood floors, a fenced yard, a study nook by the window, and in Josh's new room, painted blue with glow-in-the-dark stars, hung a simple wooden sign above his bed. Stronger than the storm. On one of their first nights in the new house, the rain returned. It started gently at first, then began to pick up, drumming against the windows like fingers tapping a secret. Josh padded into Claire's room in his pajamas, dragging his stuffed dinosaur behind him. Mommy, he whispered. She looked up from her book. Yes, love? Will it happen again? Claire got up and knelt beside him. Do you mean the storm? He nodded, eyes big. She took his hands in hers. Storms always come, she said, but we're not scared of them anymore. He smiled sleepily and nodded. Because we're stronger now? Claire kissed his forehead. Exactly. They stood by the window for a moment, watching the wind bend the trees. And as the thunder rolled far in the distance, neither of them flinched. They were home. They were safe. They had weathered the worst and found the best in its wake.